Salutations, Shades, and welcome back to your one-stop shop for all things strange and unusual, talking with shadows. The conversation everyone has, but no one wants to admit to. Here with your host, Vic Whately.
And Marcus D. And we want to give a big shout out to our newest patron supporter, Killer Turnus. Thank you so much for signing up and giving us some support. We appreciate that so much. And guys, if we sound a little different,
a little better,
yes, a little clearer, that is because we are recording on a completely new sound setup.
Thank you, patrons.
Absolutely. Thank you, patrons. All the patron support so much was able to get us to be able to buy some new mics, some new cords, and a big thank you to my parents, Mama and Papa D, for buying us the soundboard for our podcast. We appreciate that so much, guys. We actually, God, Vic, I now feel like we're actually like a legit podcast now that we're actually recording on like some actual professional equipment.
Okay, guys, let me paint you a picture here. Before this, what it was the two of us sitting in lawn chairs gathered around a single Yeti mic, trying to both talk into it. Now we each have our own mic. They're professional mics. They're on professional stands with these big weights on the end. We have this weird device over here that like gathers up all the noise, and eventually we're going to be able to put in sound effects and other stuff like that.
You even left off the part where we were like huddled in your basement when we first started doing this.
When we first started, it was just the two of us on a couch trying to talk into the computer's microphone.
Trying to figure out how all of this stuff worked using copywritten music.
Oh yeah, we learned not to do that real quick.
Oh yeah, and now we've come so far now, finally being able to actually like record on something professional. And again, we could not have done any of this without all of the support that you guys have given us along the way. So it means the absolute world to us. We said at the very beginning, nobody loves their fans more than us, and that is still 100% true.
Big hearts, guys.
Big, super, super hearts. So I thought that we could begin by going over all the comments again from our previous episode. If you guys didn't check out our last episode, we've kicked off the whole month where we're talking about paranormal government projects. And we began the month with talking about Project Sign. The United States is like first official, you guys can't see the air quotes, but you heard my voice, official UFO investigation project. And it was a great video, and I highly suggest that you guys go back and check out that awesome episode. Here we go. Laughing Fox, patron, then raised concerns over the secrecy of phenomenon, likely from the Russians, and it was turned over to Grudge while they were delved deeper into what was going on and what could be gained. Also, when are y'all going to address the time-traveling human as aliens during the abduction theory I threw out? I was looking forward to that. Yes, I have the same handle on here as this patron. Yeah, me and Vic are actually good friends of Laughing Fox in real life, and we know who this is. Yeah, I think it could be either or. I think that it could be an instance when you look at Project Sign of what one hand doesn't know, what the other is doing. There's a lot of compartmentalization when it comes to the United States military. A lot of times, not every single branch of the military knows what the other is doing. A little bit later in the month, when we really delve into like Project Stargate, that's going to become pretty apparent when you see like a lot of the different branches of the military kind of pretty much starting over from scratch whenever they really get into trying to use psychics for their experimentation.
And you really hit the two main ideas I'm stuck between as well. My mind went to the exact same place, so you're at least among good company on that struggle. I thought we did address his question last time. Did we forget it?
We'll make sure that we go back and do it again. I got the original comment up here. We'll go back and talk about your comment. That's no problem. Like I always said, you guys can always leave negative comments because we will absolutely respond to all those. So he's talking about like his comment from on hybrid theory and alien abduction. What your comment was assume you're correct in the assumption that they are near human and effed Sorry, because we're on the main part. The idea of future humanity traveling back in time to try to unlock themselves. Does the idea of humans traveling back in time to unlock themselves into your mind? It could account for quite a few things. The bizarre nature of hybrids and Men in Black. I've read about this time in history from very old records. Their fascination with small mechanical devices. Imagine getting your hands on the original. I can never pronounce this old like Greek clock thing. It's like Antikythera mechanism.
Okay, now I'm second guessing myself on pronunciation.
Yes, it's essentially that Greek device that nobody knows exactly how it works. The secretive nature of their operations, trying not to undo the future that causes them to come about, and therefore creating a paradox. I haven't done nearly enough research to this to see if it really holds much water as it might. As the first, and I'll be the first to admit, it makes pretty huge assumptions as to both the possibility of time travel as well as how it operates. But I'd be surprised if someone smarter than me hadn't put forth this theory before.
I have heard this theory before, and I think that it makes more sense than them being extraterrestrials from another, like, far-off solar system. I have thought actually a lot about this one. I think it's a possibility, but it's one of those ones that there's so many assumptions and so many things outside of our current grasp of science involved in it that it's really hard to go very far in a personal theory on it. But no, I'm with you. I've entertained this thought many times.
Well, it's also difficult when you're thinking about the concept of time travel and how do we perceive the concept of time. You know, like time works differently in different parts of the cosmos. So imagine, say, like us traveling back on time on Earth, we might not have necessarily traveled back in time from Jupiter. Like if we were over there, like if that's how we're like thinking of time with like how gravity actually affects time.
But I do think that it is quite possible that we will one day we'll either figure out if it's possible or not, because we are at a point where we know that time is manipulatable to an extent by using speed. So I think that if we continue along those lines, we will either figure out how to do it or figure out why it's impossible or non-feasible.
I think it's easier for me to wrap my head around the idea that it's some sort of like secret high-tech group of humans that already exist on Earth. Like if you think back to some of what we did, like mythological cities, are there these cities of like superhumans that are existing like in remote places like around the world and things like that? To me, it makes more sense that something like that likely could be going on than necessarily of us seeing like somebody traveling back in time.
Actually, I like the theory of the ancient civilization version more, but I don't think it's more likely. I think both of these theories are equally valid things to throw out.
It's easier for me.
Both of them have like big problems with being able to establish any sort of like truth to them.
Okay, I watched that movie Interstellar at least 3 times, and I'm still trying to grip my mind around the concept of time and on how that works. Like, so that's why I'm kind of like leaning more towards like it's in human cities.
Like I heard a physicist once say, I really wish I could remember his name. I'm pretty sure it was the older Asian guy with the long white hair. I just can't recall his name offhand. And I believe it was him who said that we could probably travel through time, but it's an infeasibility because it would take a power source the size of a sun. But at the same time, power and how to utilize it is something that humans are always engaged in. That what's required now, based on how we know how it works, does not mean that's how it's always going to be. There might be a situation where we'll figure out how to power something like this.
So I heard a physicist say something once, but I really didn't understand it. So.
Oh yeah, that's most physics. Like, okay, I like physics. I like talking physics. I will sometimes track down people who know a lot about it just to have conversations about it. Because as much as I enjoy it, there are a lot of things in physics I personally struggle with and do not understand.
If you see a lot of physicists and like what happens to them once they seem to wrap their minds around these concepts, and actually it's kind of quite similar to people in the paranormal field, where at the end you're not quite sure if they're actually okay.
It gets weird.
It does after a while. Rabid Sage says, I love the mentioning of Foo Fighters. I read a lot about wonder weapons. The Nazis had some pretty crazy tech. They made these weird static electricity hoverboard things and way crazier stuff. Like imagine what's on combined with a mover's dolly and a helicopter. There's old World War II videos of an American riding it after the war. I believe it was called the Flying Donut. I know what they're talking about with this.
Yeah.
I imagine one of these at night from a distance would look a lot like floating orbs from the ground, especially with a bright red light on it. Did you know that they had infrared night vision scopes all the way back to World War II? Far ahead they were. That's Star Wars stuff.
I did not know about the infrared scopes, but we will be talking about some Nazi stuff today.
No, I 100% believe that. There's a lot of this. I think sometimes, the study of the paranormal is, the study of the unknown, and then the more that you study it, the more it's no longer paranormal because it's the known, and then we stop talking about it in the thing. So it's very quite possible that many times when people are seeing something, like, you just don't exactly know what it is. Like recently they came out with the Navy coming out with like those videos of those flying UFOs, and they're like, oh yeah, UFOs are real. Well, yeah. And they're like, yeah, this is like real stuff. Like, we all think that it could be UFOs, but they're just saying that it's unidentified aircraft. So Jay the Phoenix says, what are your thoughts on the theory that some of our current technology being derived from these downed craft? Wouldn't that A, go against the point of secrecy, and B, be a little out there? Like, what are the odds that we understand any of their technology to begin with? If we did, it would no doubt be implemented in war.
I think that it's likely that if there are these downed crafts, I personally believe so, that we are doing everything we can to reverse engineer. I think at the same time, there's that issue of when we make advancements by understanding this sort of reverse engineering, that once we use it publicly, particularly against an enemy in an act of war, they're going to be trying to recover anything that we use that they shoot down to try to technology too. I heard it once said that pretty much was on between two peoples that have a technological disparity starts to really even out over 5 years of battle because of each side stealing tactics from the other. I don't know how, but I think I heard that on like the History Channel or something.
J Camargo 2048 says, this would be even greater if you guys could show images related to the topic you guys are talking about. I agree with you 100%. A lot of the stuff that, especially for this episode, is just like so that we can get our podcast up on YouTube. If you definitely are wanting to check out stuff with like images of what we're talking about as we're talking about it, I highly recommend you guys checking out our case files, some of our older work when we did oh gosh, what was our segments when we were talking about the Midwest?
Candlelight
Strolls. That's right. I would say, yeah. I highly recommend checking out all of that. There's a lot, you see a lot better visual elements. A lot of this is just so that we can put our podcast up on YouTube so that way you guys can check it out. But I do like the idea of going, and I would eventually like to be able to get to do that. If we can do this full time, 100%. If you guys want to see that, go sign up for our Patreon. If we get enough money, guys, we will do this full time. Because both me and Vic want to do this full time, 100%. Okay, that is all of our comments for today. So now we can finally delve into the alcohol for this episode. What are we going to be partaking of today, Vic?
Okay, I went through the kitchen to see what I had because I'm a little low right now, and I found us a bottle of Oliver's Sangria.
Didn't you buy like 5 bottles of wine the last time we went to the liquor store?
It does not take me long to get through 5 bottles of wine.
He drinks it right from the bottle.
I do.
And just straight from he drinks it by the bottle.
Ask anyone really into wine. You never let your wine breathe. You have to keep it suffocated. Oliver's, I really like Oliver's. A lot of their wine. I know a lot of people say it's low quality wine, but I actually think it's pretty good. And their sangria, it's hard to go bad with a sangria. They just kind of taste good.
You struggling with that top over there to get that off?
No.
You need me to help you. You better not. You take that, man. You do not pour that on our new equipment. You bring that around the table.
Marcus is going to be drinking a glass, and I'll be shining off the rest of the bottle.
That is fine. You bring that around the table, dude.
Here you go. Here you go. He is so paranoid that I'm going to spill liquid on his new machinery.
It took you 10 minutes to knock the mic off the table.
I didn't have it set up right.
It took you 10 minutes.
In my defense, it was more like 30, but point taken.
Oh, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
For anybody who's really into wine, we are drinking our sangria warm. You're not supposed to drink it. So
That's okay. Sometimes it's even if you do consider it, like, don't you put that there? That is right by the no. You're moving, sir.
oh my god. Okay,
Guys, I am here for you guys. I'm here to protect the podcast from Vic's irresponsibility. I will be here as a guardian to this podcast.
Okay, today we're going to be continuing on our topic of paranormal projects, and we're going to be talking about Nazi paranormal projects. And I was surprised to find out there were quite a few.
Yeah, so I remember when we were just like trying to come up with the idea of what we were going to talk about for this. The first thing that I wanted to do was like paranormal cryptid projects that governments had done.
I told you that there wasn't hardly anything out there on it.
I felt that I'm like, this is the one thing that I didn't know. I wanted to try to see if we can branch out there, and I discovered that like a lot of just governments don't see a whole lot of like, I think, importance on protecting animals or dealing with cryptids. So,
or they've managed to keep it more secretive than they have with other projects.
I guess. But so then we decided that, what do you want to do? And, not the Nazi paranormal projects that they did are some of the most interesting to check out. I mean, even before the podcast, there's like tons. Like if you look on Netflix, like there are tons of documentaries and different stuff that exposes that cover like what the Nazis were looking into in World War II, because they were looking into some very dark stuff.
For prep for this, I ended up reading Hitler's Monster, and if you want a real long book on this sort of topic, I do recommend it. It's very well written, but just keep in mind, it is a big, extremely fact-dense book. Like, I think a lot of it ended up kind of going in one ear and out the other just because the information is that dense.
Yeah, like other than like American UFO government projects, I would say like the number two, and maybe even arguably, honestly, even maybe arguably number one, would be some of the stuff that the Nazis were doing, like leading up into World War II, are some of some of the biggest projects that we've seen to date. Like with governments really like looking into paranormal stuff.
One thing I want to start this off with is a lot of people talk about Nazi occultism, and I don't really think that that's the right word. Actually, often the Nazis came up in a confrontational way with occultism, not because they were anti-occult. It was really more, they were definitely into the mysticism side, but they weren't into the secrecy normally associated with occultism. So the word occultism I don't think fits it quite right, because they were all about the mysticism, but they wanted it to be entirely out in public.
Okay. Well, and I think I'm going to start this podcast off by saying Nazis are bad.
Oh, yeah.
I felt like that should be the number one, but you can go with that as your number one.
How many times have I badmouthed Nazis on the podcast? You guys should already know I'm pretty anti-Nazi.
Yeah, like your point is a good number two. I think my point is a good number one. That I wanted to say.
Disclaimer: we do not like Nazis.
They terrible.
Did terrible things.
They are horrible. They are horrible individuals and just awful human beings. Vic, I will say right off the bat, I think when you're looking at this topic, it's not like Project Sign. It's not like a particular paranormal project. Like, it is a huge umbrella. Like, honestly, this itself could have been its own month-long discussion.
It really could have. I had always heard rumors about them being involved with the paranormal, being involved with occultic activities and things like that, but I did not understand to what extent it was. It was just so pervasive in so many things they did. It was even a big director in a lot of things that they were involved with. But let's start getting into particulars. Where do you want to start? Because there are a lot of strange, paranormal, supernatural, mystic things involved with the Nazis.
Okay. I got a good place that I want to start. So I was very surprised because I remember prior to this episode, and I mean, even prior to us even doing the podcast before, I remember just binge watching so many documentaries on Netflix and YouTube videos where it was like almost commonplace for people to be like, oh yeah, Nazis were into the occult. Yeah, Nazis were into mysticism, and and Hitler did a bunch of weird stuff. And right in the beginning of my research, like new research for this topic, I discovered there's almost this weird modern pushback to that concept. Even some people saying, "Oh, there's not as much evidence as you think that they were actually into the paranormal." Like
That
if you,
is not correct.
I know. I don't think it. I don't think it is either. But it was very. I was very surprised how many people and how many people in the academics were actually attempting to make this argument. I don't know if it's just the new popular thing people are trying to do, because no matter how much I listened to their cases for it, like it just didn't seem to make any sense to me.
I don't know why people, because I feel it's pretty well established. Like, I could see people pulling back on the Nazis weren't so much occulting, and that's more for technical reasons with the word occult. They were definitely into mysticism, and they were definitely into some very supernatural aspects.
Okay, like I can make like if you think like because there were times in which even in Germany in which it became illegal to use certain particular like occult practices like tarot card readings, like psychic readings and things like that. I mean, they rounded up numerous people within Germany and put them into concentration camps because of it.
Well, that's for a few reasons. Some people who were rounded up for occultic activity, that was more because it was secretive to the Nazi party, and they didn't want this stuff to be going on in a secret sort of quote-unquote anti-German way. They felt that it needs to be something that's done above board. And another part is some of the stuff they did not believe in, and they felt like that's charlatanism committed against the German people, which that's stuff they wouldn't stand for. So there's this weird back and forth where there are points where they're rounding up people who are mystics and occultists, but then they're also executing a lot of occultic, quote-unquote, more mystic, I should be using that word.
Oh, yeah.
Like tactics within themselves.
Oh, 100%. I think for a lot of what was going with that is you know, that with any government, whenever they see a practice of something that's going on, like if they feel like somebody in some sort of way might use something against them, they're going to start trying to crack down and regulate it, and and things like that. So yeah, I definitely agree, because there were definitely people that the Nazis employed that were using like tarot card readings or psychic readings and astrology readings and things like that they had employed by.
Let's talk about dowsing.
Oh yeah,
they
map
were
dowsing.
Very into dowsing.
Absolutely.
Much of the German mystical concept and supernatural concept came from these Fukish beliefs. And Fukish, it's a complicated, multicultural, mystical system that relies on this belief in Aryan blood, these old traditions of pagan Germany, and a lot of other stuff that comes from India and Tibet, and things that you don't even normally associate with, like, say, the Third Reich. They pulled in all of stuff from a lot of different directions. It all kind of coalesces into the Fukish, and also a lot of border science is involved in there too.
Like, I know the whole time you're sitting there talking to me, like point blank saying, like, using the word Fukish, but honestly, that sounds like you're saying that it's rubbish when you use that word.
It's a weird word. Fukish is a weird word. I wasn't actually even aware of it before I started my studies into this. I knew the concepts individually. I didn't know that there was like kind of a blanket term for it.
Yeah, like I feel like if you were talking it down, you would still use the word Fukish. Like in and of itself, like undermines its credibility.
It kind of has the same sort of feel as the word poppycock. But one of the things that Fukish thinkers were very into was dowsing. Mm-hmm. And they used this in wartime in very interesting ways.
Yeah, they did. They were using map dowsing as a way of trying to find English battleships and English trade ships, where they would have like these map walls, and they would start using like map dowsing to try to like narrow down like where the English battleships were, so that way they could move their own ships either around or over there to intercept, or move their U-boats to intercept them.
They even had table maps where dowsing mystics would literally hold their arm out all day, kind of just slowly drifting it over the map and waiting for like a tingle to let them know that that's where a ship was.
Like, in my mind, I really feel that they're like the grandpa from like the Jackie Chan Adventure show where they're like, Himagogo fighties out, Himagogo fighties out, like trying to find where these things like were.
But they felt that they were getting success from this technique.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even map dowsing was almost used during like the Vietnam War too. Like the idea of map dowsing was pitched to the United States Marine Corps as a way of being able to find like Viet Cong booby traps. They just decided not to go with it.
This is part of Stargate, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, let me phrase that. I don't know if it was officially like part of Stargate. It was just an idea that people had looked into. The idea of map dowsing like has been something that like has existed as a thing like through time, and the Nazis were very prone to using it to look for boats, which I thought was like really, really, really super interesting.
It was neat. I wish we had more information, like on specific times when it had worked out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I thought one of the things that was really, really fascinating, like during Hitler's rise to power with involving like astrology. Like he had like paid-rolled astrologists.
Yeah, in Germany at the time, astrology wasn't just considered to be something in the realm of the mystic. It was at the point where it was considered within Germany to be a straight-up science, like a reliable German science that you could use. And no, they didn't follow any of the normative precautions on it, but no, they considered it to be something that was extremely trustable.
Absolutely. And there was recent stuff has come out that even talked about like a weird astrologer shadow war that went on between the Nazi government and the British government, that like both of them had astrologers on paid staff in order to be able to try to convince the German people that either like they were going to live, the Reich was going to last for 1,000 years, or that it was about to crumble and you need to give up now. Like the English used a guy named Louis de Wolf that they had on their paid staff to write these like hokey astrological, like this is the English side, not the German side. But the English said that they would write these, they would pay him to write these like horoscopes that would like say like, oh, you guys need to give up now, Hitler's going to lose and all these other sorts of things. And that they were paying him for years in order to be able to do these things.
Apparently they even chose many of their military exercises based on like astrology, like when would be good training days to get maximum effect out of training your leader units, and when would be a good time to launch an invasion, things like that. So they pretty seriously believed in this sort of stuff.
No, absolutely. That was a weird thing that I saw, that a lot of the Nazi party believed that astrology was a thing that you could use, that they wanted to base a lot of their stuff around. And then you got Winston Churchill on the other side that's like, this is poppycock. But however, if the Germans are going to think that this is going to work, we might as well put somebody on paid staff in order to like do our own horoscopes too.
I mean, that's not a exercise.
It was a belief enough in the people at the time that they were doing it that it shifted the strategy of the UK.
And it wasn't just like Nazi major officials who believed it. One reason that made it so effective was the common German citizen believed very strongly in this.
100%. 100%.
Want to get into some of the weirder stuff?
Right before we get into the weirder stuff, what I want to do is I think this would be a good time to take a quick commercial break, so that way that we can give guys could give you guys a little bit. But on our next episode that's going to be coming out, we're going to be having the guys from the Infinite Rabbit Hole podcast. They're going to be coming on, where we're going to be talking about the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats, as well as Project Stargate and MK Ultra. And it's going to be an absolutely fantastic episode. These guys are really awesome. So we're going to take a quick commercial break so that way you guys can hear their pitch for their stuff, and you guys should check them out.
But stick around, because when we're coming back, we're talking about Nazi werewolves.
Welcome to the Infinite Rabbit Hole podcast. Let us be your hosts and your guides through the world of the strange and the misunderstood. There is an entire world that parallels our own, and with your help, we can uncover the truth and break the walls of our dimension to expose the reality that lies on the fringe of our existence. Follow us into the worlds of science fiction, cryptozoology, the paranormal, extraterrestrial, fringe medicine, psychological anomalies, and everything in between. Our show is available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Now, strap in, hang tight, and open your eyes, ears, and minds as we dive into the infinite rabbit hole.
Awesome, and welcome back. Definitely make sure that you guys check out the episode when we bring them on, guys. It is going to be a fantastic time. But all right, let's get into the reason why you guys stuck around. Nazi werewolves. No, all right,
I
Vic.
was when I read about this.
It's okay. So I think a lot of people know about like the Nazi super weapons, like about like the giant gun that could shoot miles and miles away. You know, their research into rockets and things like that.
The Landkreuzer.
Nazi werewolves. There's
Yes.
really Nazi now. Not only now do I have to worry about like just Nazis in general is bad enough, but there's Nazi werewolves too.
It's interesting.
Like there's a bunch of skinhead werewolves that are like just going to be going on a rampage. Like this is something that they actually like look into or had.
Kind of. The belief in werewolves in that time period was more pervasive than I had initially thought. Like the idea that werewolves, vampires, actual walking mummies, and revenants was a much wider belief in Central Europe at that time period than I had originally thought. Because you don't normally associate that sort of thinking with that time period. But it was there. It was in the mind of the Central Europeans.
Now, but I don't remember this exactly being in any of Hitler's speeches. Like, and we will defend the motherland with the German werewolf. Like, I don't remember that being as part of his like out loud plan and future for Germany, though.
It was not something that he was preaching about in the street. It was part of more of a Eastern defense protocol, like because he's mainly using it to defend against these. But they had some very specific views on werewolves. They believed Aryan werewolves, and big surprise, Hitler thought Aryans had better werewolves too, were different than the werewolves that everyone else had. Although he did believe that others had werewolves. You see, he thought that the Swanians, people of Swanian descent, had werewolves, but they were these out of control, heathenistic, evil, ravaging monsters that'll kill you. But no, the pure Aryan werewolves, he believed, were special defenders of the Aryan land and soul, uncorruptible, and fueled by pure Aryan light.
I, at this point, did not believe that Hitler could take his racism to just another level. Like a new, like not only like he's just going to be like other cultures, werewolves are inferior to ours.
Yes, he did. And he also, okay.
How do you just lower the bar as a human being even more than Hitler? And he just found a way from beyond the freaking grave.
If you want to take it to a worse place, no kidding you, this was a Nazi belief. And it gets real Twilight and real racist here. So just a heads up, guys, not my opinions or thoughts. This is just coming from the Third Reich here.
I believe all werewolves are equally the same in all cultures. I respect them all.
They also believed that the Jewish people had vampires, and they were concerned about these vampires. And the myth of there being association with blood drinking and Jewish folks, it goes back a long ways.
Thousands of years. The blood libel is just a bizarre, just racist thing that people have been using against those people for like thousands of years. It's crazy.
But Hitler takes it to a new level. He basically says that they're out there, they're here for specifically Aryan blood, and that this is a threat that we have to combat. And that's one of the things that he was looking at with his werewolf program, is that being the Aryan answer to these vampires. So he goes full Twilight on this and decides that he's going to get Aryan werewolves to the Russians and the vampires.
Okay, it's time for me to bring up this argument right now. At the same time, too, the Nazis were doing a lot of a particular substance known as the methamphetamine. They were doing a lot of meth. Like, you don't think maybe at a certain point the stuff that he's ranting and raving about, like on this, might have had something to do, like with the gratuitous amounts of meth he was doing?
Likely, some of the stuff that he was talking about was amplified by the rampant drug use, but this is a belief that did pre-exist it and was already common in like the German folk traditions, and actually even in the German minds, part of their zeitgeist, that supernatural creatures, to an extent, were things that were actually out there still. They were still in this pseudo-medieval mindset in a way.
Well, I mean, if you think about like modern day conversations about ghosts, like, the average person, if you ask them in a room by themselves, like, yeah, I believe in ghosts, or maybe I don't believe in ghosts, but I've had this weird experience with one, that they say that, well, a lot of people will actually like say in private they believe in ghosts, but it's not like we're going to be about this like at massive rallies and gatherings and campaign. I mean, unless you go to a
And
con, I
that's
guess, but
probably pretty similar to how the German people viewed werewolves, vampires, specifically mummies came up. Golems, they believed that the Allies were working with Hebrew scholars to golems at one point, but they felt that the way that they have their own supernatural soldiers to fight supernatural soldiers was the werewolf.
but they actually believed that legit German soldiers could turn into like full werewolves.
Okay, this one took me some digging to answer because I found a lot of references to these werewolf programs, that this was a thing, that there were these special werewolf defenders. Now, getting into exactly what it meant to the Nazis of that time period took me some digging, but I think I've unraveled the situation. They did that people who were of pure enough Aryan blood with the right sort of mystical applications could fully transform into a half wolf, half man monstrosity to wreck the Soviet Union. But that's not what they believed that most of their soldiers were ready for. The people who were associated with this they believed more that these Aryans had this special mystical wolf spirit that was attached to them, and that they could call on that wolf spirit, and it wouldn't be a physical transformation, but kind of a mystically induced, more noble berserker sort of thing. That they could call on this wolf spirit to turn them into a greater than normal human. That it wouldn't be like they actually transform their head, turns into a wolf's head, and they grow large claws. But they could call on this wolf spirit to enhance them in combat. And that they could then use that to fight off supernatural beings. Because although it wasn't a physical transformation, they did believe at that point this human was a supernatural entity.
Why did I not hear about this in my high school history class?
Let's just make everything boring.
Okay, let me
There's
rephrase
so
that.
many cool parts of history.
Let me rephrase that. Why did I not hear about this in my college history class?
Because college professors don't like to talk about werewolves.
I feel like this like if a like I feel like now we genuinely want to vilify, which we should, Nazis and how much of terrible people that they are. I feel like, honestly, I feel like people should know that, like, Hitler's plan was unleashing massive werewolves upon unsuspecting groups of people.
Okay, why this isn't brought up more, I think part of it is a lot of the Fukish influences on the Nazis are underlooked. Like, I remember my high school history teacher talking about, like, oh, certainly they would have turned on the Japanese because they were non-Aryans if they had won the war. But that's actually not what their ideology was. They had actually rationalized that Japanese people were also Aryans and that they could coexist with them. That wouldn't like contradict anything within their view. And that part was never taught either. But actually, even in the final parts of the war, many Nazis felt that the werewolves were still the last line. That even after the Third Reich had fallen, that these werewolf soldiers were now lying in wait and at some point would transform and uprise and restore the Third Reich.
You were talking about like the end of the war, something that like I think even like a lot of the research that we got, like once like the Soviet Union and the United States was like really closing in on Germany, or they knew that they were getting close, so much of their research on so many different things was being destroyed by the Nazis so that it wouldn't get figured out. And I honest to God, really, with what we know, with what on just their fellow man, like on their fellow man, and how awful those things were, I can't even imagine some of the stuff that like maybe that they experimented upon their own people, like these own werewolves, like what their plan was, like for them, or what they tried to do, maybe even to try to get them to be able to, fully like, go straight werewolf on everybody.
I didn't find a whole lot of like the scientific experiment, the mystical scientific. It's hard to say scientific when it comes to the Nazis because they utilize border science so much. It's stuff that we wouldn't necessarily recognize as science, but they would call it science. So their quote unquote scientific experimentation, I didn't find very much of it involved with the werewolves. They just kind of accepted that this was part of the more mystical German soul, and that they didn't really need to tinker around with it. Now, like, perhaps they did, and it's just something that information did not make it to it. It might have been destroyed, but it doesn't seem like there was a lot of that. They just kind of took it as, okay, you guys are already of this wolf spirit. You guys can go out and you guys are going to fight in this area. And if the Third Reich collapses, you guys are going to go into hiding. And then when the time comes, go into your berserk and go ahead and make this attack. There's even a rumor of I'm trying to recall what mountain it was, but there's even a rumor that there was a special werewolf stronghold in one of the German mountains where, like, they were to fall back to if everything would go bad, and then unleash their fury from that fortress.
Could you imagine being an American soldier being told that you gotta go get that fort? Like, all right, son, I need you to go get that fort. I'm like, not doing it, sir. There's werewolves in there. I'm like, I ain't going in there. German werewolves up in there. They gonna tear me apart. Like, I can't even imagine, like, being tasked with trying to, like, do them out. That would just be awful.
There's even references to Hitler believing he had this special wolf oversoul, like this German oversoul of a wolf, that he could call on to give him fury and power, and he could use that to conduct, like when he's working with his dogs, he could use it to cow his dogs and give him control over them, and that he could use it to, like, instill fury in his werewolf soldiers. It's a very peculiar sort of thing, but he does talk about how even his name harkens back to, like, this wolf soul.
Like, I know that he says that. The dude is only 5'9" and, like, I think, like, 140 pounds. No, sorry, yeah, 160 pounds. He is not a big dude.
I mean, okay, let me put it this way. If someone that size was telling you this statement, I would probably assume it's the meth.
Yeah, I would too.
Lot the meth
like,
talking,
I think that might have been some of the meth talking. And then, like, I think I have this German wolf soul. I'm like, okay. You know, because, like, I don't think a lot of people realize, like right up towards the end of the war, Heinrich Himmler, who was super, I would say, arguably more into the occult than at least I truly believing in it from an earlier age longer than Adolf Hitler was. Like, right before the end.
That's true, because most of the things seem to imply that Adolf didn't really get into, like, the occult, mysticism until, like, he was an adult. Yeah.
Like, right up at the end of the war, like, Heinrich Himmler reaches out to the Allies trying to surrender. This is Heinrich, the architect of the Holocaust, huge into the occult, having some weird way out there. And this guy thought that Hitler's cheese had slid off the cracker. Like, can you imagine some of the stuff that Hitler must have been saying, like, in the privacy of, like, I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
Probably some pretty crazy stuff involving a werewolf soul inside of him. I mean, I'm not going to defend it, like, Hitler's viewpoints. The guy was a terrible person. Now, it does seem that some of the werewolves never had a big notable effect on the battlefield. They seem to have performed mainly about, like, what you would expect from a standard soldier. Now, they were up against some serious fighting, but there's nothing that I can look at to imply that these people were more effective in combat than any other soldier. Now, there are some of these mystical aspects that the Third Reich did experiment with that did look like they had some potential to them. Mm-hmm. Things like the map dowsing and stuff like that.
Oh, absolutely.
And, one more thing. I know we're getting tight on time, but just to get you into Hitler's mindset on some of this stuff and how, even in a mystical sense, he was a very unscientific thinker. Are you familiar with the experiments of reanimating bodies?
Oh, yeah, the Nazi zombie experiments?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Terrible human. Terrible.
He actually stepped in to change the route they're going with it in a very odd direction. I know this is one of those things that kind of upset some of his officers because of the odd direction they had to now experiment with, because they're connecting reanimation with the idea of bringing someone out of a death from freezing. And they were trying to use, like, heaters and stuff to warm them up to see how often they could actually reanimate someone, and could they use that technique to fully reanimate corpses so they had never-ending soldiers. Well, Hitler looked at the project and went, of course this isn't working to the degree that you want. It's not electronic warmth that will call a German soul back to its body. It's animal warmth. You have to have women warm up these bodies for these experiments. And they stopped using things like heaters to rewarm the bodies and would actually get people to snuggle up with the frozen to death person. Like, okay, first, yes, this whole thing's terrible, but think about being the person who's trying to examine this from a scientific way and being told the method you have to use now is having people snuggle up with the frozen bodies.
God, he's a terrible person.
Terrible person.
I don't think he could. I don't know if I could be threatened or paid enough money in order to snuggle with a zombie. I don't think that's going to happen.
But at the same time, that's kind of a fairly incompetent call because it makes your ability, even taking out all the horrificness involved with it, it's also just straight a ineffective means of continuing an experiment.
At the same, yeah, again, dude, he's a meth addict and he's riddled with syphilis. Okay, yeah, I don't think he's necessarily the most stable person, probably to be doing some of these things. But like, so sometimes it makes me wonder, like, how much of it is it just driven by that, or they're just their belief, or at the end of the day, is it just because like what with syphilis and drugs, what they do is, if they just increase your stress levels to the point where you just start, I don't know, just end up like being pushed to these extreme limits. That's why you're seeing some of these extreme, egregious acts in order to try to find some sort of semblance of power. I don't know.
Another thing to recognize is in that time period, part of the German national identity was a reliance of instinct over intellect.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's a big part on how they came to some of these very odd ideas. Like one of the ones that we didn't even get to in this episode, the world ice theory. Deep down makes very, very little sense, but was accepted as being scientific fact because it has this fookish backing, and they relied more on instinct over intellect.
Mm. The more that I looked into these guys' experiments, I often wonder, like, if how much of it is it that they themselves truly believed these things, or how much that they saw that these were avenues that they could control a populace of people to do the things that they needed them to do. Because if you look at like what the German people were going through like World War I and the aftermath of like the Treaty of Versailles, like what happened to the German people who truly believed that their empire was massively crippled from it. They were horribly shamed on a global scale. They'd given up so much, and there was a lot of frustration and anger and shame that was going on through their country. That were the Nazis exploiting the German people's beliefs as a means of being able to motivate them to do some of the things that they did during World War II.
It does seem that at least some of the people involved with the Third Reich were legitimate, true believers in this fookish worldview. Not all of them. Some of them thought it was kind of really silly. And there were even points where Hitler would double back on himself and talk about these fookish wanderers and how they have nonsense. He still believed in part of it, but he kind of bounced between being a true believer and then being somewhat skeptical of what they said. But it was a very erratic sort of bounce.
But like if you
probably
look,
the meth.
But like if you look at, say, like go back to the werewolf, the werewolves that we were talking about.
Get into it.
Oh, okay.
But going back to it, how did you? I always called it the Treaty of Versailles. What did you
Versailles?
call it?
Yeah, Treaty of Versailles.
Oh, okay. I thought I might have been mispronouncing.
I think I just pronounced the name. This
okay.
Line's good to me.
Much of the German national identity was crushed after World War I. This was a group of people struggling to figure out who they were in the face of dramatic defeat and oppression. I think that reinforced the German identity of we need to go back to this fookish sort of belief, which said Germans were part of this ancient culture that stemmed from Atlantis that made them truly deep down special. And I think that helped reinforce a supernatural worldview that then either A, people exploited because it was easily exploitable, or B, they believed it themselves. Exactly which one's the truth of the matter? Hard to say. I actually think that many of them in the Third Reich were true believers of this very supernatural worldview. And I think in some ways, some of their experiments seem to have worked, some of them didn't. But it makes me very curious, because one of the questions that I have is, if they were using this very odd fookish sort of science that seems to be based off of nothing we would consider scientific today, at the same time, they made some pretty big strides in science at the time period, which you would assume would not happen if they were just using nonsense.
Well, I don't think necessarily it was just nonsense, but like, you know, like, but if you look at like, say, like the average soldier that was in the German military at the time, you look at somebody like in their between the ages of 20 and 30, you have a very disenfranchised, you know, German youth that, you know, grew up in the aftermath of World War I. And then and you're one of these guys, and then you're being told that, oh, there's this great inner power within you as being this great werewolf that could come out of you, and you could do these great things. Like what that could do to, like what that would inspire a soldier to do. Now, on top of that, you add on top of like a military leader who could get somebody to do that, you almost become like kind of drunk with power. Like you probably want to believe these sorts of things.
Let me throw something out to reinforce that idea a little more. Part of the Fukish belief that Hitler actually did preach about in his speeches is this idea that when the German soul dies, it doesn't go to heaven or hell. It stays with the German people, that it pours back into it. And your friends aren't dead. They just march with you unseen now. That no German soldier in either war has died. They're still part of the German oversoul marching with you. And yes, statements like that would speak strongly to people in that demographic, people who are struggling to find an identity and find an answer to why has this all happened. And a lot of people say Hitler really, really could tap into who the Germans were at that moment, that he could identify with them in ways other speakers couldn't. It wasn't that he was necessarily this natural, super charismatic person, which he was very charismatic, but his true power came from being able to identify so purely with the German people and how they're feeling at that time. And that's what gave him such powers of influence. And he attributed it to a cult. Like we're still just scraping the surface of the cult stuff in the Third Reich. I think we're going to have to continue it into our pillow talk.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because we haven't even got
to the
Hitler's
super weapons.
Yeah, or
like the magic weapons that the Nazis were trying to get their hands on.
He went on a quest for magic lightning, and we haven't even talked about it.
Oh my gosh. Like again, but it's an overall arching umbrella. I think that it truthfully, honestly impacts more of the modern occult than I think that people truly would want to admit. But you know, so I think it's a very interesting thing for people to look at, especially if you want to try to like compare like the 1950s to the 1970s for like the United States and the Soviet Union's occult research that they got into.
I think we have the same closing thoughts though.
Yeah.
Nazis suck.
Nazis suck. Yeah, our final thoughts on this is summed up in Nazis suck. They're terrible people. Like I think that's our final thoughts on that. So if you guys like this episode, don't forget to subscribe if you're listening on YouTube, and hit the notification bell, because that way you can stay up to date whenever we put out another topic. Let us know what you guys think about the new audio setup. Did we sound good? Did we sound better? Let us know what you guys think about that. If you guys are listening to this on any sort of platform and can leave a review, please leave us a review. Comment below on YouTube as well. That's another great way. We love to read your guys' comments. Good, bad, and the ugly. We're going to read them. Again, thank you so much for checking out this episode. We really appreciate all the support that you guys give us. But until next time, guys, keep believing.
Because we'll keep listening. So, how are you doing on your glass of wine?
I finished my glass of wine. It was very good, so I'm going to start getting into this chair. It's just Coke Zero. That's fine.
I have almost finished the rest of the bottle of that sangria. I'm down to kind of the dregs, so I'm ready to keep going.
It was awesome. All right, guys, we're going to slide into the pillow talk segment of the podcast. So if you want to check out the rest of this podcast, all you got to do is go over to our Patreon and sign up for as little as $1 a month. You guys get the rest of the podcast, as well as access to exclusive videos that we put up just on our Patreon alone, just for them. And if you sign up for $2 a month, you actually get to vote on our poll for the theme of our month of what it's going to be. I think I'm pulling it up now. What I'm trying to see what our current poll is standing at. What's the next for the month of May? All right. Ooh. Okay. So right now it's in a heated race between Nephilim and Giants versus Time and Space Anomalies.
Those are both good ones.
Also very awesome.
Is it tied?
No. Nephilim and Giants is up to 5, and Time and Space Anomalies is up to 3. So if you want to let your voice be heard, go over to our Patreon and sign up for $2 a month or more, and you guys can vote on what we're going to be talking about all next month. Either way, you guys are going to have a good time either way, so it's going to be fun anyway. All right, let's keep going. The conversation going on about the Nazi occult projects.
Okay, there's something here I was wanting to talk about.
Yeah.
Hitler was heavily influenced by the Nibelungen, which I probably mispronounced somewhat there.
You're drunk.
Shut up. As well as the Poetic and Prose Edda. Now, I haven't personally read the Nibelungen, but I have read both the prose and the Poetic Edda.
You made that word up.
Which one?
Nibelungen. That sounds made up, man.
The Nibelungen is basically a modern reimagining of much of ancient Norse, and it involved this battle between like great Aryan heroes and this dwarfish race. You can kind of see how Hitler might have latched onto it with some of his other views. But I haven't actually personally read that one. But like I said, I know the prose and poetic Edda fairly well. And there's a particular thing that's a trend between them that he really latched onto. And that's the idea that these Norse gods had special